Good afternoon. First, please accept my apology that I must do this talk in English. Were I to speak in Spanish, I would embarrass not only myself, but you. Second, I would like to start with gratitude. I would like to thank Andreas, Mr. Salinas, the staff and volunteers of City of Ideas, and I would like to thank all of you, the audience. We would not be here sharing all of our dangerous ideas, sharing our stories, if we didn't have you to talk to. We have heard some amazing stories over the last few days, stories in service of incredible work. And I love hearing these stories because story is my work, because I am a storyteller. I don't have slides yet. Well, it's a good thing I'm a storyteller because that means that I can go, storyteller, there you go. So I am a storyteller. When I tell people I'm a storyteller, all kinds of things happen. Sometimes people say, oh, that means you're an actor. Well, no, I'm not an actor. There are some commonalities between my art and the art of the actor, but no, I'm not an actor. Sometimes people say, oh, so you read books to children, and while I do tell stories to children, I don't have a book in front of me. And others say, oh, so you must be in marketing. I'm not a marketer. Marketers do use some of the tools of the storyteller, but storytelling has been around for a lot longer than marketing. And sometimes when I tell people I'm a storyteller, they sigh, shake their heads, and assume that I am a liar. I'm not a liar. Storytellers are speakers of the truth, and in fact, it's embedded in the word. Let's look at the word story and historia. Both of these words come from the Greek root finding out. When we tell stories and when we listen to stories, we are exchanging information about the world. Humans are storytelling creatures. In fact, I would argue that human beings are the only animal that use story, that story is what differentiates us from all other animals. I mean, think about it. Other animals build. Other animals adorn themselves. Other animals grieve. Other animals use tools. Humans are the only animals that we know of that use sustained narrative to convey information about the world. We use narrative to understand ourselves and our place in the world. We use narrative to reveal truth, whether it's metaphorical narrative or literal narrative. But you know, talking to you about storytelling is kind of like putting a plate of food in front of you and saying, you can only look at it. Let me tell you a story. Not so long ago, my husband and I were traveling in California. It was a wonderful trip, but by far my favorite part of this trip was when we walked along the Pacific Ocean. We went to a beach that had been important to him many, many years ago, and as we walked, I could smell the salt. I could hear the waves crashing in and watch them rushing into shore and pulling away. I admired the surfers and their bravery. We walked along a rocky ledge, and I could feel the sand gritting beneath my feet, and then we stood at the edge of that ledge and we looked out at the world. The sun was setting. The world was tinged in pink and orange and gold. I could see dolphins arcing across the horizon. It was so beautiful. We stood there and finally caught our breath, then turned and walked away, because that's what you do with the sublime. You gasp, and then you turn and walk away. And as we walked back, I saw a woman sitting with her knees drawn up to her chest, staring out at the world. I stopped behind her and I said, "It's beautiful, isn't it?" She looked up at me. "It is." "I love this place," she said. "I love this place. I used to come here all the time with my husband. We took our first date here. We brought our children here. We would come here during the butterfly migrations, and he would hold out his arms, and the butterflies would land on him. He said their feet felt like the touch of the divine. I buried him today. And I came here today because I want to remember him like this. I want to remember him covered in orange and black wings, not in a hospital bed. I don't want to remember the beeps and the tubes and him so small. I want to remember him like this." And she began to cry. I knelt down beside her and I held her until the storm passed. And then she sniffed and looked relieved and embarrassed. I stood up and I turned and I walked away, because that's what you do with the sublime. And as I walked, I reached over and held my husband's hand, his palm warm against mine. And as we walked, I thought, I am so lucky. I am so lucky. I am so lucky. Now, there was a lot happening during that story. I was telling, you were listening, to be sure, but each of you was experiencing your own moment. You were hearing your own waves. You were smelling the salt. You were seeing your own beaches. And really, it doesn't matter if it's my beach or your beach. What matters is that there was a beach, and that communally, all 3,500 of us shared that moment, shared that beach. What's more, we shared our own memories of love, of grief, of the sublime. And all of this makes sense when you think about it, because human beings are absolutely wired for stories. There have been recent functional MRI studies looking at narrative. And when people watch a video, when they're in that MRI tube, their visual cortex lights up, their audio centers light up, and that's about it. When they read, their visual cortex lights up, and their image-making centers light up, their language processing centers, but that's about it. But when they listen to a story, mouth to ear, spoken narrative, their experiential centers light up. When you hear a story, it is as though you are actually experiencing that moment. What's more, MRI images of storytellers and listeners, when compared at the same moment in the story, match. They are identical. Your brain and mine are the same when we hear a story. So, what happens when we tell stories and tell them again and again and again and shape new stories? When we tell stories, we have the power to reshape our lives. Stories are the vessel to keep out the dark. Stories build community. They build hope. They build bridges. They build possibility. When we tell stories, when we create the possibility of change, we can create new worlds, just the way that woman on the beach did. She was creating a world that was rich with the memory of her husband and butterflies, not condemned to the memory of grief and despair. Imagine, if you will, if Dr. Martin Luther King had not told his stories. Imagine if he had no listeners. When we tell stories, we create hope, and what's more, when we listen to stories, we create the possibility of change. Listening to a story tells that storyteller that, yes, I believe this world is possible. Yes, I believe this dream is possible. Yes, we can create this new collaborative reality together. And so, all that being said, I have a challenge for you. I would like you to think about the stories in your life, the stories in your home, in yourself, in your families, your organizations. Now, think about one element of those stories that you'd like to change, a little thing. Perhaps you bite your nails. Maybe your desk is too messy. Or maybe in your office, those meetings just go on way too long. Imagine what it would be like to tell a different story. Could we have the house lights on, please? Thank you. I'd like you to look around this room. Look around, not at me, look at each other. In this room, there are tens, if not hundreds, of people who would love to hear your story. I challenge you, sometime before this conference is over, find someone, tell them your story, give them the possibility of a new world. What's more, if you are lucky enough to be one of the people who gets to hear a story, listen as if that story could be real. Listen with your whole heart. It's not your job to critique. It's not your job to offer suggestions or solve problems. Your entire job is to listen to the story and believe in that dream. I would love to hear your story. My husband would love to hear your story. I'm sure each of you would love to hear each other's stories. So, I ask you, what if we could change our lives by telling different stories? What if we could help each other change our lives by listening to those stories, the simple act of listening? What if, together, we could re-story and restore the world? I would love to hear what happens. Thank you so much.
François de la Croacia.